It's 7:42 in the morning. The house is still half asleep. Somewhere near the window, a small cage sits in a patch of early light, and inside it, a budgie shifts on its perch, fluffed up, quiet, just waiting. You've seen this 100 times before. It looks like nothing, you know. Just a bird waking up slowly, the way anything does at dawn. The coffee machine is still gurgling in the kitchen. Outside, a car door shuts. The morning is moving at its usual unhurried pace, and honestly, nothing about that little cage looks urgent at all. Except, watch the clock a little longer. Because in the next few minutes, something is happening inside that tiny body that is almost nothing to do with waking up and everything to do with survival. A countdown most owners never even notice. Ticking down from the moment the sun came up, moving faster than anything else in the room. By the time you finally poured your own coffee, that countdown is already getting dangerously close to zero. Here's what most people don't realize. A budgie's body runs on a completely different kind of clock than ours. We think in terms of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, hours apart, plenty of comfortable margin for error. A budgie doesn't get that luxury. Its metabolism moves at a pace built for a creature that weighs almost nothing and burns through fuel almost as fast as it breathes. Skip a human breakfast and you just feel a little irritable by 10. Skip a budgie's vital window and the countdown moves from an inconvenience straight to an emergency in a fraction of the time, faster than most owners would ever guess. Watching that same little bird sit calmly on its perch, giving zero obvious signs that anything is wrong at all. And that's the part people miss. There's something almost deceptive about how totally ordinary it looks from the outside. No frantic scrambling, no loud alarms, just a small, still shape in a cage, looking exactly the way it's supposed to look on any other normal morning. That exact stillness, that's why it's so easy to miss. Here's why this actually matters, and why it isn't just some quirky biology fact. An animal burning fuel that fast doesn't have a backup tank. There is no slow decline or some gradual warning sign you'd easily catch. The shift from totally fine to in deep trouble can happen in a matter of hours, not days. And by the time you actually notice the symptoms, the emergency has already been building quietly for a while. That's the part that should honestly worry you, because it means every time you slip up on the schedule or think, oh, I'll feed him right after this meeting, or assume a few extra hours won't hurt, you're operating on a timeline that is way less forgiving than you think. Before we go any further, if this kind of hidden biology fascinates you, the way a tiny creature's whole world runs on a clock most of us never even think about, stick around. There's a lot more of this hiding in plain sight, and it's really worth understanding before it costs you something you didn't expect to lose. If you subscribe, you won't miss the rest of it. Honestly, there's way more to this story than most people ever bother to learn. Let's start with the mechanics, because they explain everything. A budgie's resting heart rate is several times faster than a human's. Its body temperature is way higher too. This means the internal furnace burning through calories never actually slows down, not even when they're asleep. Think of it like a candle burning at both ends at the exact same time in a room with no draft to cool it down. That is the metabolic reality inside that tiny chest every single hour of every single day. If you listen really closely to a budgie at rest, you can almost hear it, this faint, rapid heartbeat, working way harder than its size would ever make you think. It's like a quiet little engine that never fully idles. If you could hear that sound clearly, it would tell you more about the urgency of their situation than any visible symptom ever could. Now, think about what that means for how they eat. Most owners fill up a seed dish once or maybe twice a day, and they think that's plenty because the dish still looks half full by the evening. But a full dish doesn't mean they're eating properly. Budgies need to eat in small, frequent bursts all day long. They graze instead of gorging themselves because their bodies just weren't built to store anything for later. If you interrupt that grazing rhythm, maybe because of a long meeting, a day trip, or even just a dish that's technically full but sitting at a weird angle, blocked or dirty, the shortfall starts adding up fast, hour by hour, totally invisible, until suddenly it isn't. Here's a scenario that happens way more often than people want to admit. A dish is sitting there full of seed, but under the surface, it's actually just husks. The bird has already eaten all the actual kernels and left the empty shells behind. From across the room, the dish looks totally untouched. The owner sees plenty of food, but the bird is quietly starving, sitting right next to a container that looks completely full. It's a weird kind of illusion, and it's the type of thing that only reveals itself if you actually run your fingers through the dish instead of just glancing at it. If you shake it gently, the truth comes right to the top. You'll hear this papery, weightless rustle of empty shells. Nothing like the heavy, dense scrape of real seed. But most owners never actually check, because at a glance, nothing looks wrong. Now layer in another hidden variable: interaction itself. It sounds kind of strange, but honestly, for a budgie, feeding and social contact are wound together in ways that go right back to their wild flock behavior. In the wild, they feed in groups. They use the presence of others as a signal that it's safe to eat. Remove that social cue, leave the bird isolated for long stretches with no movement, no familiar voice, and the feeding behavior itself can just shut down, even with food sitting right there in front of them. The dish isn't the only thing that has to be present. The sense of safety has to be there too. And that safety, that's something only you provide. Here's what most people don't realize. Think about what an empty house actually sounds like from inside a small cage. No footsteps, no conversation drifting in from another room. No shadow occasionally passes the doorway. To a flock animal built to associate silence with exposure, that quiet isn't peaceful. It kind of feels like the exact condition that would have meant danger for thousands of generations before this particular bird ever knew what a cage was. The instinct doesn't know it's safe indoors. It only knows the pattern it evolved to recognize. And an empty, silent house, it matches that pattern closely enough to trigger it. This is where the timeline gets a little uncomfortable, because a bird that stops eating from stress, it doesn't announce it. There's no dramatic collapse in the first hour. Just a quiet decline, less movement, feathers a bit more puffed than usual. A stillness that looks an awful lot like rest, but honestly, it isn't. By the time it's obvious to a casual glance, that metabolic cliff has already been approaching for way longer than most owners would ever guess. And here's where the danger just compounds, because it's rarely one thing on its own. A skipped feeding window is risky, sure, but a skipped feeding window combined with a dead quiet house, no TV, no talking, nobody walking past the cage for hours, that multiplies the risk. The bird isn't just running low on fuel, you see. It's running low on fuel while its stress hormones are climbing, burning through what little reserve is left even faster than normal. This is the buildup most people miss. Each piece looks totally harmless in isolation. A slightly late feeding, a quiet afternoon, a dish that looks full, but not really. None of it feels like an emergency right then. But metabolic clocks don't care how something looks. They only care about how much time has passed since the last real meal and how much true safety the bird actually felt in between. Picture the ordinary version of that afternoon. You step out for what feels like nothing, a short errand, maybe an hour, maybe two. The house goes quiet behind you. From your perspective, barely any time has passed by the time you're back, keys jingling, calling out a familiar greeting. But inside that cage, an entirely different clock has been running the whole time, totally indifferent to how quick your errand felt. And this is the moment that kind of changes everything you thought you understood about that small cage by the window. The real danger was never simply budgies need to eat often. That's the surface version, the one most care guides just mention in passing. Here's what people miss. A budgie's survival clock is silently linked to your presence, your rhythm, your predictability, not just your ability to fill a dish. Miss that feeding window, and the countdown accelerates. Remove the social safety that makes eating feel possible in the first place. The countdown accelerates again, compounding hour by hour, completely invisible until the moment it isn't. It means the real risk was never a single missed meal. It was the invisible stacking of small, ordinary absences. A late morning, a quiet afternoon, a longer errand than usual. Each one just shaves time off a margin that was already way thinner than you'd imagine. None of it looks dangerous while it's happening. All of it is. That bird on the perch this morning wasn't simply waking up. It was already, quietly, urgently waiting on you. Not for company, not for entertainment, but for the exact rhythm of care that keeps its entire biological system from crossing a line it cannot come back from on its own. Which brings us right back to that window, that early light, that small shape-shifting on its perch at 7:42 in the morning. What looked like nothing at the start of the story was never nothing. It was the opening moment of a countdown that never really stops one, that resets every single day, entirely dependent on whether you show up on time, whether the house stays warm with your presence, whether the dish holds real food and not just empty shells. You're not simply feeding a pet here. You are the single variable standing between a fragile, fast-burning little body and a cliff edge it cannot see coming, but is always quietly standing close to. Every ordinary morning you've ever walked past that cage without a second thought was, from the bird's side of the bars, never ordinary at all. So here's a question worth sitting with. How sure are you right now, this very second, that your Budgie's dish holds what you actually think it does? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever really checked?